Hi there. First of all, I'd like to congratulate the Pune Literary Festival for another successful year. I'm Anita Murjani, and one of the things that's close to my heart, which I believe the world needs more of, is compassion. And also, to go with that, we need more empathy, sensitivity, and love. And of course, let's throw joy into that mix too. We're going through really strange times right now. And what I've noticed is that the messages that are coming at us, whether it's from mainstream media, social media, generally from the world at large, the messages seem to be very fear-based. And because we are now in this kind of fear-based state where people are worried and concerned, they're concerned about the pandemic and so on, what this does is it puts us in fight or flight, which actually makes us very divisive and angry sometimes towards our fellow human beings. Everybody is just doing their best. And that's why I wanted to remind people that what's missing right now is compassion, empathy, love for our fellow human beings. And so I make it my mission to keep spreading that and sharing that. I actually make it a point to not share fear-based messages at all. And because there's enough people doing it already. Even when people tell me that I need to be more realistic, this is real, it's okay. There's enough people doing it. I'm here to spread love and compassion and empathy. And I think that more of us should be doing that. And so this is my reminder for you to do that. And also, of course, this is a good time to spread and share joy and happiness. So thank you for listening and tuning in, and I wish you all the best. Love you guys. Bye.
Welcome back to Studio 2. We welcome our esteemed panel for Salzburg Global Seminar presents Dementia, Understanding and Prevention. John Lautherington. John Lautherington is a program consultant at Salzburg Global Seminar who worked most recently on Salzburg Global Health and Healthcare programs. His publications as editor and author include The Communications Revolution, The 7 Ages of Life, The Tudor Years, Divine Comedy by Dante. He is a trustee of the Foundation for Democracy and Sustainable Development and of Cumberland Lodge and a governor of Good Enough College, London, UK. Ian Sherriff. Ian had a career in the Fleet Air Arm for 25 years. He has been an active part of the life of blind veterans for over 46 years. Ian was a trustee on the National Board of the Alzheimer's Society, a position he held for 7 years. His work on dementia research and community development on dementia is recognized regionally, nationally, and internationally. He is the chair of a global group for dementia and is an active member of the British Standards Institute and the International. I request our guests to take this discussion forward.
Thank you very much indeed, and a warm welcome to everybody to this discussion of dementia, understanding and prevention. Dementia is such an important subject in our world, and it's of course a growing one, particularly in aging societies. It touches so many lives, and it's too often treated with either a passive despair or in some cases hostility and active discrimination. But there is so much that can be done to support people living with dementia and their carers, to enhance well-being and to live fuller lives. This is so important, and we have to find ways forward here. And I should say that echoing our introduction, it's about compassion, it's about empathy, it's about love, and it's not about fear. And I can't think really of anybody better to discuss these issues than Ian Sherriff. Ian has been such a dedicated promoter of ways to support people living with dementia and their carers. And he's found so many open doors, which people have previously walked past. And we want to explore some of those open doors, but we do need to be realistic about some of the issues that are involved, and particularly in recent times. So I think we should start by considering the impact of the pandemic on people living with dementia and on their carers and loved ones. So Ian, could you give us some of the pointers about our experience over the last year or two and what we need to pay attention to most?
Yeah, and thank you for that wonderful introduction from everybody. I just want to deviate a wee bit here because there was a writer called Tom Kipwood, and it picks up on everything you've just said. And Tom said, the uniqueness of a person with dementia, where there is special knowledge without empathy, care can be detached and cold. But when empathy and personal knowledge come together, miracles can happen. Yeah. And I think that's been my sort of banner since I came into this work, because, you know, we need to have empathy, but marry that with personal knowledge. And I always say to people who are planning, understand the person with dementia's past, their present, and you can plan for their future. And that's what we've done with the groups that I chair and move forward. But I think Charles Dickens summed up the times we're in at the moment. And I pinched a quote from his book, The Tale of Two Cities. And I've said, we've gone from the worst of times, and that's the pandemic. You know, 2019, we didn't know where we were going. And then suddenly, the best of times. This reflected our communities coming together to make lonely, vulnerable, and isolated individuals make sure they're supported and cared for in their own communities. And I've seen that not only in the UK, but across the globe. And it's really heartwarming to see that. And so, yes, I agree with your first person who spoke. But then it was the age of foolishness. And the foolishness was people not following the lockdown codes, etc., etc. And I don't need to name them or shame them, but you know, people in our community. And then we went to the spring of hope. We could have a vaccine by January, and finally the season of light, the vaccines are being rolled out. And I know that's not equal across the world, but all of us are trying like mad to make sure that happens. So let's just look at the question that John has posed. And I think, you know, during the pandemic here in the United Kingdom, we have about 850,000 people with dementia. We have 40,000 plus people between the age of 30 and 64 with dementia. But one of the big things we found out, a third of people in the United Kingdom who have dementia live on their own. So you can imagine pandemic, living on your own, that must have been devastating. And finally, we do know that family carers, people caring for their loved ones in the homes, were displaying anxiety, worn out, alone and isolated. So, and if you measure that to say how many people in the world have got dementia, that's 55 million. So goodness knows how some of those have coped in the past year. But I'll just give you some figures that we did, the Alzheimer's Society did some research during the pandemic, just to ask people about what has happened, what's changed for them. And they surveyed 20,000 people. And we found that during lockdown, that 82% of those respondents reported deterioration in their symptoms. Of those 82%, half reported increase in memory loss, difficult concentration, and 1 in 4, 25%, said they'd lost the ability to reading and writing, had become more difficult. And more than a quarter had seen a loss in the ability to do daily tasks such as cooking and dressing. So the pandemic, that loneliness, that isolation, that fear of something might go wrong, I might catch it, etc., has definitely had a big impact. And one of the big impacts is on the family carers. And they were talking about, you know, being isolated, lonely. You know, before the pandemic, most carers, or all carers for people living with dementia in their own homes, are working 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And that was telling before the lockdown. But now we're seeing, and then this is backed up by people on the global group that I chair, that carers in other countries are displaying the same symptoms as post-traumatic stress. And so we've got a great big bubble of issues that are following the pandemic. And these are some other quotes, some of the things. I'm scared, I'm depressed, I worry too much. That was a family carer. When can I next see my doctor face to face? And so you can see what was building. So what did we do to try and alleviate that? Well, and I think John's going to ask me some questions about this in a minute, so I won't go too much into it. But, dementia-friendly communities coming together. If we learned anything during this pandemic, it's about how we, as individuals living in our communities, can help each other. And we'll come on to that again in a minute. But, when you think the world, there's 55 million people living with dementia, that is amazing. And, that as an issue for not only governments and organizations, but for our communities as well. So hopefully that's a sort of a lead in, John. I do go on a bit. So there we go.
No, thank you very much, Ian. That's very interesting. And one of the particular issues with regard to the pandemic is about, obviously, vaccination. And this has been, for some people, quite a controversial subject. And there is the issue of consent to any medical procedure, including vaccination. How does that play out, the issue of consent for people living with dementia and also those closest to them?
I think definitely here in the United Kingdom, we would always say what you need to do is, as soon as you get your diagnosis, try and get some legal advice about what systems, processes you need to have in place before you lose the capacity to make decisions about your own life, be it health, social care, financial, and what that means is then that can be delegated to somebody else. It could be a family carer, it could be somebody in your family, or it could be another professional. But we would advocate that. So when it does come to the time where you most probably cannot make those decisions, there's somebody there who's doing that on your behalf. But I just go back to the wording about capacity. And in the Mental Health Act we have here in the United Kingdom, a person does not have medical capacity to make decisions themselves, then a best interest decision is made. But one of the things I've found with decision makers is that they really complicate the question for the person to answer. And I can give you an easy one. I'll ask John now. John, do you like chocolate?
Yes.
Right. Now, if I said, John, do you like chocolate? But how many calories have you had today? And did you know chocolate did this to your body, etc., etc.? It would make it extremely difficult for you to make that decision. So I think it's not a brilliant way to explain the complicated questions, but it just shows you that if you asked simple questions about issues, then a good percentage of the time the individual can answer those. But my overriding guidance would be to try to get people to make those decisions about who can make decisions about their lives when they've lost the capacity to do so. I hope that helps under your question, John.
Very, very much so. And one thing we should stress, as you already mentioned, Ian, very aware that there will be people listening to us now who are in parts of the world where the vaccines are not properly available.
Yes.
And part of our general drive for everybody, including people living with dementia, is to make sure that vaccines are equitably distributed around the globe for everybody's sake.
I totally agree, because if we don't vaccinate the world, then we're not going to stop this thing. So yeah. But
one thing you mentioned, and let's focus in on that now, is the spring of hope amidst all the terrible difficulties of the pandemic. And so a general question would be, what do you think might have emerged during the pandemic, which we've got to hang on to, we've learned that we can take forward? And particularly, as this has been true for so many people, how has it affected issues concerning people living with dementia with new technologies, or rather technologies that we hadn't used so much before, such as Zoom and so forth? So what's new? What do we need to hang on to? I think if I just reflect back, technology now allows us to connect anytime, anywhere to anyone in the world from any device. This is dramatically changing the way that we can support, facilitate 24/7 collaboration across time zones, countries and continents. So
if you take that down to the micro level, then we can do quite a lot with individuals, or we've done quite a lot with individuals during lockdown. And I'll just go through some of them. I'm an advocate for definitely using technology, but I've got to say, as an old and bold sort of social worker, come whatever I am, there's no substitute for a human contact. That is primate in my thinking, but I do understand that we need to think differently. And so these are some of the comments I've had back from families who were living with dementia. And one, oh no, it's more than one, quite a few said, I can see my family more often now because they don't have to travel, and I can see them on Zoom. And it's really wonderful to see my granddaughters and my grandsons and my daughters, etc. So it offers that opportunity. I think the other thing it offers is that it can be done at any time of the day, which is convenient both to the family but also the person. I'm sure you know this, but we've had to resort for remote diagnosing, both in health and social care assessments online. Not the best, but it's what we used. When you're assessing a situation, you not only look at the person, but you look at the environment. You see how they react in their environment. So whilst we've used it, it's good enough, as they say. I think the other thing is that remote stimulation, I've seen that working with using assistive technology to stimulate, etc., for people living with dementia. And that is being used for old films, newsreels, something about that person's life. And that has been amazing. And people like that. One that I've really majored on is BBC Radio, and I'm trying to get World Service to do this. We made BBC Radio Devon dementia friendly, and what that means is that their broadcasts are not fast and furious. Programs are then developed for people living with dementia, and some of them will be around, hits of the 60s and the 70s. And so that can, and with a conversation in between the songs, and talking to quite a few people living with dementia, they found that really stimulating, because it brought back memories. And as well as I do, John, and people listening, music is a very powerful, when we're talking, walking alongside people living with dementia. And I've seen our libraries and museums. Now, the Museum of Liverpool has connected globally in providing stimulation about artifacts that they have, and also artifacts around the globe. So they've teamed up with Italy and other places where, an afternoon can be spent looking at some of the wonderful artifacts that sit in these museums that never see the light of day, and providing a stimulation that goes with it. So I think, the world of technology, one, I can let you into a sort of an early mention of this. We're working with the BBC to on a thing called Radio Me, and it works that where the BBC broadcasts, underneath that there's a wavelength that's not used, and we're going to put individuals living with dementia on that, and they will only hear messages as long as they've got their local radio on. It will give messages out just personally on their radio, and it will go like, hi John, it's 1:30. You're supposed to be on a Zoom call to the conference. And so things like that, not that happened, but so I think technology, and especially in some of the countries around the globe, my goodness me, some of the technology is amazing. So I think it not only has a role now, but it has a big role in the future.
Thank you, Ian. That is absolutely fascinating. And I'd like to just ask a follow-up question about Zoom in particular, because something that has happened is everybody has learnt to live in the Zoom world, as it were,
Yes.
where they're being engaging with others. And it's a different world from the in-person world.
Yes.
One of the things, for instance, that a lot of people are very aware of is when you're in a room full of people, you sort of read the room. You understand the mood of the room and you're responding to that. Something else that happens is that people take cues from each other about who's going to speak when, and sometimes people speak over each other a little bit. Now, Zoom is very different. It separates people out more. You can't read the room in the same way. Also, it has to be more orderly. You can't have the same way in which people, cut in and out of conversation. It has to have a certainly more formal order. It occurs to me, I wonder whether in some ways Zoom can be easier sometimes for people living with dementia because of the sort of necessary rules it has. Do you have any sense of that?
I do, and it's a really good observation, John, because we've been using it with in our diagnosing, etc. And one of the projects that I'm involved in, one of the research projects, is that we were going to put dementia support workers in GP practices. We had to recruit people with dementia to see what they felt about that. And so we were seeing the individual, and it was quite interesting. A lot of them said this, not being sort of prompted by us, but said it's really good because I don't have to travel to come and see you. I can sit in my living room. I don't have to get dressed up. I don't have to drive. Don't have the concern about that. And I feel quite relaxed talking to you here in my own environment. So there was the positive side of that. But the other side, as a social, whatever we are, researchers, is that you need to see the environment, the person, and that personal interaction. So it has its drawbacks, but it has its positives as well. And we've found that. I mean, for people with dementia to tell us they enjoy it, and they'd enjoyed the experience, was quite interesting.
The other thing I'd just like to pick up on, which isn't actually connected with technology as such, though there are overlaps, and that is the importance of music, which you mentioned. And I can remember being with the father of a friend of mine who was suffering from quite advanced dementia, and he was sitting at the piano, and he was playing pieces which he'd known for many years, which were incredibly complex. Mm-hmm. And there was a look of absolute joy on his face. So I was just wondering whether you might say a little bit more about the importance of music and how that can be organized and what might be done in that way.
Music has been around with people living with dementia and for quite a while. So you got singing for, I think they used to call it singing for the brain. It's now got another name. But I've seen people who have gone to one of these sessions with their partner, and they haven't spoken much, over the last month. It's just been very, the conversations haven't flowed. And so the music, it was quite interesting. There was this couple there. The gentleman, a certain piece of music came on. He stood up, took his wife, and started to dance with her. Oh. And I remember talking to quite a famous person a couple of weeks ago, and he asked me the same question. And I said to him, look, what was in the hit parade? I go back to the hit parade and things like that. And he said, oh, it was this song. And I said, well, let's just hear it. And he started to hum it. And I said, well, what did that bring to you? He says, oh, I can remember the girlfriend I had at that time. I can remember the rooms, what the furniture was like, etc., etc. So music is very stimulating. So it can generate thoughts, etc., feelings, which, those tend to get lost in this modern world that we live in. So very powerful. And I know it's being used around the world because you'll get elders of certain communities who's reflecting back on songs and culture issues, etc. So use it to its full.
That's wonderful. Thanks, Ian. And, we had that stress at the introduction about the importance of joy and so much joy can come through music. And also there is a thesis that music, singing specifically, is prior to speech, that as a species we sang before we spoke.
We did.
And this is something perhaps we should remember for everybody and for our education systems.
Yes.
Music is fundamental. It connects with us. It connects between us in a way that is so important. So thank you very much for those comments. But one thing I'd like to do now is to turn to some of those areas where life, which for many is mundane and routine, can be extremely difficult for people living with dementia and those seeking to look after them and support them. And Ian has been involved in a number of sectors helping to make things better. I should say that necessarily Ian has been involved mostly in UK sectors, so apologies that these are going to be UK-based examples, I know, for a global audience, but I hope there'll be lots of resonance across borders as well. So Ian, I'd like you to perhaps to take us through some case studies of where a difference has been made and how has that been made. So for instance, I know you've worked with dentists with that profession.
Yes.
What's been important there as an example?
Well, we were being told by people living with, everything I do is because of what people living with dementia and their families have told us. So we were being told that it was very difficult to get a dental appointment. And when they got there, people didn't understand us. And, you know, the issues of going to the dentist, you know, it's not everybody's best day out. I mean, it's never seen as a fun activity, but it's frightening for a person living with dementia. And so, you know, you turn up as a person with a mask on, they stick a drill in your mouth, you know, confusing. And so what we did, we sat down with our dental school here in Plymouth and people living with dementia, and we came up with some, well, it's a small booklet, and I'm happy to share it with anybody around the globe because it can be, you know, changed to meet the needs in your communities. So we looked at the process. So how do you get an appointment, and do you need a longer appointment because things need to be explained? It takes longer to do that with a person living with dementia. So we advocated, same as I did with the airports, was for people maybe to come to the dentist before their actual appointment to get familiarized, to understand what's going on, but also to make those dental surgeries dementia friendly. We're very lucky. I teach doctors, nurses and dentists and goodness knows what else. But in the dental side, we tasked the third year dentist to go away and design a dementia friendly surgery. And they came back with these drawings and they did a fly through one with videos. And what it focused on was, one was signage, two was access, three was the where how you would get from the door to where you had to go, toilets, etc., etc. But then it talked about the people. So understanding the person with dementia, what is it like to have dementia? So we've written the whole piece on that. Then the place, what the place is like. So is it friendly? Is it inviting? You know, the receptionist, right the way through to the dentist themselves, that they know it's John coming for his dental appointment. So it's good morning, John. How are you? Lovely to see you. Right the way through to the dental chair. But also explaining everything as you go down that route. Now, it's not complicated. None of this is sort of rocket science. It's just being humans, understanding each other, empathizing with that individual. And as I said to start with, when you empathize and understand the individual, you can produce miracles. And that's what is happening in the dental world. I did the same thing in airports. I was tasked by the Prime Minister's group to make airports dementia friendly. And that was quite a task to be told on a Monday. That's what we're going to do about it. So I managed to get pilots, a cabin crew, airport staff, security staff, you name it, anybody to do with the aircraft world. And I even managed to borrow a simulator, an aircraft simulator, so we could see what people living with dementia, how they would react to certain situations in the back of an aircraft. And we spent about 18 months doing that. What we've finally come up with is that we've changed that every airport in the United Kingdom has to meet certain standards, and they're checked on every year about hidden disabilities or people with dementia traveling. And there'll be, first of all, we invented the lanyard system, and I'm very pleased to say it's gone global. It's the green lanyard you'll see people wearing. That doesn't say I am disabled. What it says is I have a hidden disability. I might need some help. So we plan the dementia pathway from leaving the house right the way to getting on the aeroplane and getting off the other end. And at each pinch point, we wrote something into the document. So security was the big one, where one of the stories was as a person with dementia was flying with his family, and he got to the security check to go through the magnetic eye that you go through, and the security guy quite rightly said, look, take your belt off, we can't have you with your belt on. So he did that, but the daughter of the man said, look, the last time, you know, he's lost so much weight, please can I just hold his trousers? And he says, no, step back. And as the gentleman went through, his trousers fell down. He cried, had a challenging behavior issue, and he didn't go on holiday. But that wasn't because the guy was wrong. He just didn't understand. And so airport staff now have to go through sort of training. There's quiet routes for people with dementia, and also special quiet lounges are set aside for them. It's the same when you get on an aeroplane. What we've said there, could the person either go on first or could they go on last? Whichever is more appropriate. So it's just about thinking what it's like for the individual, and how can you make that a pleasurable experience. And so we've done that. And that's happened in the United Kingdom. But the good news is that we've set up a group called I Dare to Fly. And we're getting people around the globe joining that so that we can share all the work that we've done, but also learn from them as well. This isn't a one-way street, any group I'm on. We're constantly learning from each other around the globe. So that was a real game changer, I think. And I managed to get it through the House of Lords and the House of Commons to change everything. So I'm not sitting back on my laurels, but that was definitely one of the good ones.
We never thought you were sitting back on your laurels, Ian. That's a fascinating story. And just reflecting on issues around travel more generally, it seems to me that one of the terrible things sometimes that happens with people living with dementia is that they get imprisoned in their homes, and travel can be so daunting. You've been talking about airports. Would you have anything to add on other aspects of travel, perhaps, as it were, literally closer to home, trains, buses and things like that? How much change is needed there?
Well, there's change on the way. We're definitely one bus company that I've been working with, and I'll give you an example. They've invented a little tiny card that the individual with dementia shows the driver, and it might say, put me off at stop number 6, because it is keeping the person's independence going. It'll also say, don't start the bus until I've sat down, please. And so they've done that. All their drivers have been through a dementia awareness training. And an example of how good it worked, in this city that it happened in, there was a police signal going out saying there's a person living with dementia who's gone missing from a certain part of the city. And just by chance, the bus driver of one of the routes saw the gentleman, stopped the bus, got out, put him in the back, to the sort of amazement of the passengers, then went off his route to take the gentleman home. And so the passengers had a re-look at their city. But that's not once again, that's not rocket science. That is just trying to think through with individuals how you can travel. And we're doing with trains as well on the train system in the United Kingdom. But my understanding is that that's happening on the continent as well. So, and it's easy to do. You'd be surprised. I know sometimes bureaucracy seems to be daunting, but I always think if you knock on the door, doors tend to open, and or if they don't, kick them hard.
Thank you. Well done, Ian. I'm quite sure when you're knocking on the door, people will need to answer. That's terrific. But one of the things absolutely that I guess need to emphasize is that so much of this is not rocket science.
No.
It's about wearing a particular lanyard or having a pass you can show a bus driver, and extraordinary ways in which people do respond when they understand a particular situation or particular set of needs. Something else, I think, listening to you talk about these different sectors, is that what you're talking about are making these sectors clearer and friendlier, and focused on individuals and their needs and perceptions and so on. That's got to be good for the whole community, not just for people living with dementia, the absolute focus, but this is something that needs to be part of a general package of how we relate to one another. Isn't that right?
It is, and you know, all of us. I may be sort of being sort of rash by saying this, but everybody goes to work. They want to enjoy that, and so if you can spread I think it's a Walt Disney thing, spread a little happiness as you're doing it, you know, it's you feel all the better for it. I know there are days on those wet Thursday afternoons or whatever day, you know, that you think, oh my goodness, but I always say to people, just think what your day's like, then you just think about what a day's like for somebody living with dementia and their families, and see if you can brighten them up a bit. I know when I do my lectures with students and that, I was very lucky. I ran with the Olympic flame when it came through England. And I say to all of them at the end of my talks, look, I'll give you this Olympic flame. You just remember, you carry it high. On those days that you think, you know, the world's not very good to you, you just think what it's like for those individuals out there living with dementia. So keep that flame high. And I think that's the challenge to our audience, John. You know, I can't give you a real Olympic flame, but I can metaphorically, or whatever it is, just to say, keep a flame alive for people living with dementia.
That's a wonderful point, Ian. And just thinking through what that Olympic flame needs to be, we're talking mostly about the ways in which people living with dementia can be supported to live the fullest lives possible. We also perhaps should touch now on prevention. How do we help support people who might be subject later to living with dementia, to delay that or avoid that as much as possible? What do we know that we can do best in that area?
Well, we do know that anything, what's good for the heart is good for the head. So things like diet, exercise. I'm not asking people to say to become Olympic champions or anything, but, you know, just some regular exercise, maintaining your mental capacity, for want of a better word, you know, to carry on sort of reading, getting engaged. I mean, so many people, we live in a world where people seem to get isolated and lonely, and we know the effects of isolation and lonely are can be devastating on individuals. So it's about saying, being engaged, carrying on. And in fact, there's a new study came out today, and it's called it's done by the UK Biobank, and it's about the research they found was that if we reduce frailty, and they're talking about in our thinking, in the way we exercise, etc., it reduces, and they say this, it reduces our to have dementia. Now, the risk of not doing something is quite low. You know, if you think about, well, exercise could be just a walk, just a gentle walk around the park or around your community. Diet, you know, alcohol, smoking. I'm sure there'll be some people saying, oh gosh, I do like my cigarette, I do like my pint. Well, yes, carry on, maybe, but do it in moderation, for goodness sake. I don't think smoking you can do in moderation, but that's just me saying that. But I think it's about, going through life, doing things in moderation. It's now being proved that that does cut back or reduce your risk of a dementia.
Thank you very much. And again, what we're seeing here is that we're living as a whole community with people living with dementia, those who may develop dementia later on in life, and that taking care of our health is something that applies to this as in so many other areas.
Yes.
Now, one of the things that people sometimes observe is, and this relates to initiatives across the board, not just around issues relating to dementia, is that there are so many things that are concentrated on urban areas. And of course, a great many people live in cities and towns, but equally a great many people still live in rural areas. And I just wondered whether you could comment on some of the key differences for people living with dementia and also their carers in rural areas, and how can any problems that are specific to rural areas, how can they be best approached?
That's a really good question, John, because we know around the globe 3.4 billion people live in rural areas. And as well as I do, and people on the call today, that some of those rural areas are really isolated. And in the UK, we have about 9.6 million, not billions, but millions of people who live in rural communities. And that's about 17% of our community. And just to sort of run alongside this, I'm working with colleagues in Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda, and we're developing a project there around dementia, about education, but it's also covering the rural aspects of those countries. And the issues that we're finding in this country are relevant there as well. So lack of transport, the lack of broadband. We just think, oh gosh, everybody can just tune into Facebook and goodness knows what else. You can't. There's no signals. There's also a lack of health and social care in our rural communities, and that's not only just here in the UK, but also around the globe. And the resources in those communities to support an individual living with dementia can be reduced than you would get in an urban community. What I've done in the United Kingdom, I look for the key dominator in all of those communities, and it's a thing called a parish council, and there's 10,000 of them in England. So we got 5 of them to work together to see how they could support people living with dementia. And they were reluctant to start with, but they came together, and they're now employing a dementia support worker and 2 support workers to help with the project. That project is now supporting 64 families in that community, which then takes the pressure off health and social care. It gives them a better life living in their community. And running alongside that, we also did a project to do with dementia and farming in our farming communities. And this resonates across the globe as well. What we found was farmers were less likely to come in to see a doctor or a GP or a health professional. They will carry on and carry on and carry on. In fact, we found one farmer, or more than one, who had in his tractor post-it notes so that he could remember what lever to pull and how to drive the tractor. We also had a farmer who was going out every morning, and his wife thought he was going out to feed the animals in the fields, and he wasn't. And so his livestock was in a very bad state. So, it sort of permeates through all manner of rural communities. what I've done now is using the lessons learned from those parish councils. I've written a document which has gone out to 10,000 parish councils, and simple stuff again. It's saying that each community should have a sort of a dementia champion. That dementia champion should be getting people together to talk about how they can do it in their villages or in their isolated communities, what they can do to support people living with dementia. And that came to the fore during this pandemic. We saw some fantastic work in our rural communities where normally individuals wouldn't have got much support at all, but because they had this this way of working, this dementia-friendly rural communities, the support was not only done by shopping, getting the medication, making sure they were okay, getting food into people's houses, but also providing them with that lifeline of talking to another individual. And so, and once again, John, it's not rocket science. It's getting communities to do what communities are best at, and that is looking after each other. And they will do it. They do it. And I'm sure that's, I think we're talking to the enlightened, because I'm sure the communities around the globe are doing this.
Absolutely. And that really, Ian, brings us back to something you touched on earlier, which seems to me to have been one of the great sort of motivating ideas in recent generation or so, which has been around the idea of dementia friends and dementia friendly communities. Could you tell us a little bit more about what a dementia friend is and how a dementia friendly community works? Yeah,
it's a dementia friends. It was an idea that we in the Alzheimer's Society, actually one of our team went to Japan and borrowed the idea and brought it back to the United Kingdom, and it was started in 2012, and basically is a very simple awareness raising with individuals, and it talks about what is dementia, the myths, the realities, etc., etc. Now, what I think at the last count, we're up to nearly 4 million dementia friends in the UK. Out of that came dementia-friendly communities, and you have urban and rural. And it's once again, I set the ball rolling in 2010 with the city of Plymouth here, and that alliance, we called it a Dementia Alliance, Dementia Friendly Alliance, has over 100 companies on it. So what that means is that shops are dementia friendly. They display a sign. Your doctors, the hospitals, hospital wards, understanding of individuals with dementia, and are making their staff aware, right the way through to schools. Schools played an amazing part. We had young people in schools who were talking about dementia in maths, science, English, all their studies, in sport. And so how do you do English, learning the language, but also incorporating dementia? So what we did, we asked the young people to go out and interview a couple who had dementia, and then focus on the person who had dementia and find out as much as you could about that person's life. And you come back and you write that up as an essay, but then you put it into a more friendly framework with the life and times of the individual, and then take it back and present it to them as a present. And that was amazing. The other thing we found, when young people got involved, and we did dementia friendly sessions in schools, and in maths, it was looking at stats, and saying, right, in this country they've got that, what's the percentage of the community, etc. So it can be woven in to the curriculum. But where we saw this going on in schools, the awareness in the community was raised as well, because they would go home and say, oh, we've been talking about dementia today. Oh, what's that about? And so they were like the messengers as well in their communities. So there's another, just one way of doing it. The bus companies, we did that. We've also done it in our care homes, so they're aware. Domiciliary care. There's one group in the city, and they're now providing support to nearly 2,000 people living with dementia in this city, and it just makes life so much better. It's not perfect, I can guarantee you that, and we've got rough edges and stuff like that. But whoever's listening now, whoever's got the bug, just go into your town or your village and try and think, how could you make that town, village, or even a city much better place for an individual living with dementia to and their families to live in. And it goes back to the first comment of the person who introduced us, just saying having knowledge, empathy together, bring them together, and miracles can happen, and they do. We do that.
That's wonderful. One of the things just like to bring out and stress is the importance of the intergenerational connection. Getting younger people to connect with it. Of course, dementia is not entirely age specific. People can develop dementia at an earlier age, but it's something that's particularly prevalent among older people. And to forge that connection, generate the necessary understanding, and learn so much in the process does seem to be most important. Something else, just to sort of draw out a bit, are design issues. You've touched on things like signage, which is so important. I think there are issues around colours that are used, and where mirrors are placed, and so forth. And could you comment about the sort of issues around dementia-friendly design, perhaps?
Yes, we've had a chatting to designers, but also talking to people living with dementia and their families. And a dark mat, you'll often see a person with dementia looking at it and then thinking, gosh, so it can appear to them as a whole. And shiny floors as well can be very distracting. Mirrors, if you put a mirror where a person living with dementia is, they can sometimes be quite put off by that. So, and not only, as John said, colours as well. There's colours. I remember going to a resource, and it was called Bethany, and they'd used different colours for their walls, and you actually felt the world slowed right the way down. And so, these architects and I tell you, good people to get on board for this in your towns and cities is your students at art college. I mean, they're a wealth of knowledge about sort of colours, stimulating or making the world seem, a better place to be in. So that and local architects, when they're designing buildings, like we had a brand new building here in Plymouth called The Box. It's our showpiece. It's a museum. Well, we were invited to be on the planning group so that when they could build in design features, which we felt were very important for, for people living with dementia, so that they would feel part of the process and could be made. And it's not thousands of pounds. It really isn't. It's simple stuff. Maybe it's a tin of paint. Maybe it's a sign. They're not going to cost you a lot of money. So signage, colours, how you access the building, and also how you make the walk through the actual exhibition dementia friendly. It's simple stuff, really is.
Now, it's simple stuff, but it requires people to get the message, to understand. And one of the things perhaps that we'll include we've just got a couple of minutes left, is this is, of course, an international festival. And for instance, for an inspiration for dementia-friendly communities, you mentioned Japan. And I just wonder whether you'd like to talk a little bit more now about the potential for cross-border learning. How important is that?
Definitely. I'm working in Japan, China, America, Canada, Tanzania, Uganda, and Kenya. And I've learned from them, and they're learning from each other. So with our work in Africa, Kenya is sharing its dementia strategy with its neighboring countries. In Japan, I've learnt loads from my colleagues in Japan, and we regularly talk to each other on this medium. But before that, we were visiting each other's country, and I've worked in China in the Macau and the Pearl Delta, and they have the same issues, and they come up with amazing things that they're doing. So I think this isn't, this is a global thing. So who's ever on the call at the moment listening to us, we've done a bit, but so have hundreds of other countries around the globe. We're all working towards the same end to actually make life and living for people living with dementia a better place. And it's amazing, like in my chats on my global group, the issues are the same in each country. We're not sort of nobody's got the fountain of knowledge. We've all got a little bit to add to that fountain. So I would hope that we've stimulated something today which will get you talking not only within your country but outside your country, so that we can make the globe a better place.
Ian, thank you so much. You mentioned earlier the idea of carrying the Olympic flame when it comes to thinking about dementia, and we hope that flame has been passed on to numbers of people around the world who've been listening to you here today. So thank you very much indeed for all of this, and indeed all the work you've been doing in this absolutely vital area. Thank you, and goodbye, everyone.
Okay, goodbye. Take care.
Thank you for such an empowering discussion. We are sure our listeners gained very valuable insights regarding dementia, and that our intentions of making people aware of dementia and the reality behind it has reached out to all. We are thankful to John Lautherington and Ian Sherriff for being our guests at PLF. Our next discussion on making business humanesque will begin in a break of 15 minutes.